Zionism, it's a covenant between God and the Jewish people, according to the Zionists, to return the Jews to their homeland. And they are talking about, a homeland defined by the United Nations in 1948 or modified by the reality of conflict in 1967 or 73. They're talking about the total eradication of non-Jewish populations to create a greater Israel that is even bigger than Israel currently exists today. Israel as a nation under political Zionism can only exist by suppressing the humanity of the Palestinians, denying them a homeland, denying them dignity, denying them life. This is a reality. How do you resolve this? The only way this can be resolved is to eradicate political Zionism, just like the only way to solve the Ukrainian problem is to eradicate the Banderist ideology. But the moment you say that, the moment you say, political Zionism is an evil on the face of the planet that needs to be eradicated, you're accused of being anti-Semitic. And that's the other problem, is that the world is incapable of having an honest dialogue about Israel. I, for instance, and there's people can disagree with me all they want. That's their right. I believe Israel has a right to exist. I believe that the history of the Second World War, combined with the history of anti-Jewish pogroms in Europe and in Russia, have created the necessity for a homeland for the Jewish people. But this homeland can't exist at the expense of others. That was the whole concept of what was going on with the division of the British Mandate, as imperfect as it was. And I'll be the first one to say this whole process stinks to high heaven. But it's a decision that was backed by the United Nations. The nation of Israel was created. And then we have the complexities of history. The Israeli narrative is one of always being under attack. All the Arab nations trying to destroy them, Israel fighting for its life. Israel has an inherent right to self-defense. Well, every nation has an inherent right to self-defense. It's under Article 51 of the United Nations Charter. But Israel has taken the concept of self-defense and perverted it, because self-defense means that they have a right to do anything they want based upon what they desire to achieve the results they want. And that's just not the way the world works. Israel's self-defense does not allow it to commit mass atrocities against the Palestinian people, this collective punishment of the Palestinian people. It doesn't allow them to steal the land of the Palestinian people. It doesn't allow them to rewrite history in a manner that's convenient to Israel. We are sitting here today watching the Israeli ambassador to the United Nations affix a yellow Star of David to his clothes, as if somehow what's happening in Israel today is related to the Holocaust. Well, there is a relation. But if he was going to be honest about this relationship, he'd be putting the swastika on him and the yellow Star of David on the Palestinian people, because the tables have turned. It's Israel that is the aggressor. It is Israel that is the oppressor. It is Israel that is illegally occupying land, and it's the Palestinians that are being oppressed. When you take a look at the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising, people talk about the heroism of the Jews in the ghetto who rose up against the Nazis. They were freedom fighters. They were liberators. They were this. They were that. Please, people, understand that what Hamas did on October 7th was very much in that spirit, rising up against the Israeli oppressor, rising up against the Israeli occupier. Now, were there excesses? Undoubtedly there were, but we don't know, because Israel is in charge of that narrative. Nobody's paying attention to the Hamas version. What we do know is Israel was humiliated militarily. They weren't just asleep at the wheel, they were incompetent. 2 battalions of the Golani Brigade, the elite infantry brigade, were defeated in a stand-up fight against Hamas. The 13th Battalion, the 51st Battalion. That's embarrassing. Hamas shut down the intelligence unit. A lot of soldiers died. a lot of civilians died too. But a lot of these civilians, we don't know the exact percentage yet, but it's going to be significant, were killed by Israeli forces through counterattacks, through crossfires, through the panicked aggression that Israel did when recapturing these kibbutzes where Hamas was co-located with civilians that they had taken hostage. And people say, well, Hamas took people hostage. Do you guys know that there's 5,000 Palestinians in prison in Israel today or more? That number, we don't know because the Israelis don't fully report it, but thousands of Palestinians are in prison. And they're in prison for political crimes, for existing. And Hamas has a covenant with these people. It says, we will get you free. And so don't sit here and condemn Hamas for taking hostages when the purpose behind that hostage taking is to facilitate an exchange of prisoners. Because Israel's been taking Palestinians hostage for decades. This is conflict. It's horrible. I believe that the ideal solution would be not to have any of this. But we're at a inflection point in the history of the Middle East where if you're going to talk about solving the Israeli-Palestinian issue, you have to realistically be talking about the strategic defeat of political Zionism. And then, of course, you can't say that because in order to, what you mean by that, and what I mean by that is Hamas must win. And when I say win, I'm not talking about from the ocean to the mountains, from the river to the sea. I'm not talking about the eradicate. I'm talking about Israel being strategically defeated so that when they come to the negotiating table, they don't come with the arrogance of the victor. They come with the humility of a nation that must find a compromise to the way things currently exist because it's unsustainable right now. If this thing isn't resolved in favor of Palestine, and what I mean by that is at a minimum a two-nation state or two-state solution. Some people say that's undoable. Some people are saying it's got to be a single-state solution. I'll leave that up to the experts and the politicians. But it has to be different than what currently exists. What currently exists today is unsustainable. You have a situation where Israel is holding millions of people hostage in open-air concentration camps. It's not sustainable. Vladimir Putin is 100% correct. We clench our fists, tears roll down our faces as we look at the images of what's happening in Gaza today. And there's only one wrong side here, and that's Israel. Israel didn't have to do any of this. Israel could have opted out of all of this. What happened on October 7th was an embarrassment, just like what happened on September 11, 2001 was an embarrassment to the United States. We were attacked. Thousands lost their lives. The best thing we could have done at that point in time was fall back, regroup, and ask ourselves, how did this happen? Why did this happen? And how do we make sure it never happens again? But that's not what we did. We didn't turn to the world and say, work with us to resolve the myriad of problems that led to this attack. What we did is we went to war against terrorism, the global war on terrorism. And then we invaded Iraq, which had nothing to do with the global war on terrorism. We declared war on the Taliban, who were ready to help us to deal with the issue of al-Qaeda. People need to study Pashtunwali, the concept of the Pashtun tribal code, where if you invite people in, like the Pashtuns did, al-Qaeda, that if they carry out a crime, then the Pashtuns will resolve that. Al-Qaeda said, or the Taliban said, if you share your intelligence that proves that al-Qaeda was behind this attack, then we will resolve this issue. But that's not what we wanted. We wanted revenge, blind revenge. We wanted to slaughter people, wade into people, as Israel wants to do right now. And what happened? We lost every conflict we were in. We haven't won any of them. And our reputation around the world has collapsed. We have triggered events that have led to the geopolitical changes we're seeing right now with the rise of a multipolar world, the shrinking of American unilateral dominance. All that's because of our overreaction on 9/11. The Israelis are overreacting about October 7th, and they're going to lose. They're going to pay a price. It's a strategic mistake on the part of Israel. But if you want to solve this problem, you cannot be talking about a return to the status quo ante, because that just means the problem hasn't been solved. We're going to continue this continuous cycle of violence. To solve what's going on between Israel and Palestine today, Israel must suffer a strategic defeat.
Thank you, Scott. It seems to me that Putin knows the West better than the West knows itself. After all those years he spent in presidency and all the presidents he's seen, all the leaders he met, it looks like he knows actually more about the West than they know themselves. And I want to ask you, when they report on those military targets, they say that Israel attacked 300, 430, whatever is the number of military targets in Gaza. What are those military targets, Scott?
Well, first of all, we need to understand this. Israeli intelligence isn't that good, because we know they're not good. I mean, it's really not a debate anymore. They were asleep at the wheel when this attack took place. Yeah, we're going to find out that intelligence is a system. There's intelligence cycle. There's it's not just you don't have good intelligence because you can intercept a phone call. That's collecting data. You don't have good intelligence because you could make observations. That's collecting data. The collection of data is just part of it. The data is just raw data. It doesn't become intelligence until it's refined, until it's assessed, until an analyst sits down and starts asking the right questions, and getting answers to those questions from this data, and then putting together in a product that informs in as accurate a fashion as possible about the reality of what's going on. That's intelligence. Israel's pretty good at data collection. What they did poorly in was the final product, the intelligence product presented to the decision makers. And so suddenly we're supposed to believe that after this huge failure, that now Israel has perfect intelligence. So they can sit there and say, we're hitting 400 targets. Israel's in a panic mode right now. Panic mode. Let me give you an example of what panic mode looks like. When the Bush administration was trying to make its case for weapons of mass destruction in Iraq, they were challenged by people like me and others who said, you don't have. So in October of 2002, the Defense Intelligence Agency held a briefing where they started to say, here's the targets, and they were putting out a whole bunch of targets. Why? Well, because they wanted to make the case that Iraq was non-compliant. Because of these non-compliance, they were a threat worthy of military intervention. But what happened was somebody, I don't know who that was, went to Iraq and convinced the Iraqis to let weapons inspectors back in. And that threw a curveball into this, because now weapons inspectors are on the ground saying, give me your targets. Every one of those targets wasn't what they said it was. Every single one of them. The intelligence community of the United States was tasked with generating targets. And so they did. But they weren't real targets. There was nothing there. There was no weapons of mass destruction. So it tells you that they're just making it up to please a politician. Right now, the Israeli politicians saying, we have to strike. And so Israeli intelligence is making up targets, literally making up targets, because they didn't know what they were doing going into this. And now you can't suddenly say, oh, everything's perfect now because it's Israeli intelligence. Obviously, they know something. They didn't know anything, guys. That's why Hamas came over the border on October 7th and it kicked them around a little bit. So what Israel is bombing right now are panic targets put together in a vacuum because they don't have the data. They're doing an assessment. They're picking a place. They're told that they have to bomb X number of sites. So they're making sites up, literally making sites up. We saw this in the Gulf War back in 1991. We were desperately trying to hunt down Iraqi Scud missiles. The targeteers were just basically saying, we don't know what to do with this. So they bombed everything. We bombed buses coming out of Jordan. We bombed Bedouin tents. We bombed anything that there was no reason to do what we did, but we had to be seen as doing something. And that's what's happening right now in Gaza. They are literally bombing nothing. They're just blowing things up to make themselves feel good. Hamas is underground. And Israel doesn't know where they are underground. Israel thinks they do. You see them putting out intelligence products here, there, and everywhere. And maybe, if you drop enough ordnance on a very small piece of territory, you might end up hitting something. Hamas has said that the Israelis have killed 50 of the hostages, so they're hitting something. But this isn't a bombing campaign. And I have to also tell you this: that if there was ever justice in the world, and we went back and reverse engineered the Israeli target list and see when they hit mosques, when they hit hospitals. This is a war crime, literal war crime. The Israelis would have to come up with the reason for their for their deciding that there was military necessity in hitting these targets. And what we're going to find out is that there's no intelligence, and the people who dropped the bombs, ordered the bombs, knew that there was no intelligence, no meaningful intelligence. Israel is